In this episode, we're joined by two experts who bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table. Benjamin Steinmetz, Product Experience Director from NIO Europe. With his deep understanding of the latest automotive technologies, Ben is at the forefront of innovation, helping shape the future of sustainable mobility. And alongside him is Steve Fowler, a seasoned automotive journalist from the UK with over 30 years of experience in the industry. He has witnessed the evolution of cars firsthand and brings a unique perspective on how technology is revolutionizing the way we drive. Together, they'll take us on a deep dive into the world of software-defined vehicles and what this means for the future of driving. Welcome to House of NIO, a NIO podcast. Welcome, Ben and Steve.
I'm Ben, Product Experience Director for NIO in Europe.
And I'm Steve. I'm an automotive journalist from the UK. I've been writing about cars for 30 years. I've seen a lot of change, but never have I been more excited than I am now looking at the future of cars and technology and electric vehicles. I'm a geek, so I'm really excited to talk to you about software-defined vehicles today.
I mean, if you have been around all the fairs, IAA, CAS, etc., right? Software-defined vehicle was the buzzword for the automotive industry, comparable to AI and the rest of the industries. What's your thought about it? What's your perhaps definition, or what have you heard as a definition of a software-defined vehicles over your
Well, that's
career?
a really interesting point, because I was at CES this year, which of course is the Consumer Electronics Show. So it is full of geeks like me and full of people who make their business technology. And a lot of the car companies now go to CES. They present their latest vehicles and technologies there. And you're right, software-defined vehicles, SDV, was the buzz phrase and the theme for the car makers there. And I came away thinking not all of them know really what a software-defined vehicle is. They were just using the words, but there was nothing behind the words. So I'm going to throw it straight back at you from a NIO point of view. What is a software-defined vehicle?
So software-defined vehicle, first of all, it's only a technology, right? It's not a purpose on its own. A software-defined vehicle for me, for us, is a vehicle that can be shaped and changed rather via software than via hardware, right? So basically the characteristics of a vehicle can be changed via software. So where perhaps in the past you went to a tuner, right, to put in a new suspension in the car. In the future, or already today, right, you simply change the software code or you change a software setting and the whole suspension experience changes. And that's crucially important for the first owner of the car, but also then the second owner perhaps has different preferences, or even in a household where you have multiple people, right? One likes to drive sporty, the other one perhaps is a bit more relaxed, safety-oriented, and the car should reflect it. The car should reflect, or should be able to reflect, the personal preferences of the users.
I like that. I like the user benefit. It's clear that there has to be a user benefit to any technology. We will see technologies come and go that people think that's a great idea, and it turns out the user just didn't want them or didn't use them. And that's another great thing about software-defined vehicles. You know exactly how people are behaving, and if you put features into cars that people aren't using, quite simply, you can take them away again. But can I just ask you, taking it back to from an engineering perspective, there's a lot of talk, particularly of traditional car makers, the guys we call the OEMs, that they really struggle with building software-defined vehicles because they build cars, wheels, chassis, engines, whatever, and then they put computers in them rather than perhaps what the likes of NIO and Tesla and some of the newer brands do. The computer, the software comes first, and then the hardware comes second. Is that the case, that software first, hardware second, as opposed to the traditional way of doing hardware first, then we put the software in?
That's a really good question. I think it's they're equal partners in the car, the software and the hardware, right? They need to support each other instead of one following the other, right? Some people even say hardware should follow software. I partially agree in the terms of that. With a software-defined vehicle, you don't put your hardware to the limit, right, to save costs, etc. You need to think ahead. You need to perhaps spend a bit more on certain components, because today you don't really know what you want to achieve with the same hardware tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big mind change the industry needs to go through. Secondly, software-defined vehicle is a big term, as you said, right? And it opens such a new world. So if you only want to do a software-defined vehicle, you might struggle with the definition of it because it's endless, basically. So I would rather recommend to come from an experience perspective. What kind of, like you said, user benefits do I want to achieve when I design the software and the hardware together? But what do you see as an industry insights? You just talked briefly about other OEMs. What's for you the root cause? Do you see a pattern, or do you think it's different for each and every OEM?
I think there are haves and have-nots here, and I think there are the haves, the newer organizations, the likes of NIO, who are very much software first. But the legacy car companies, if we can call them that, the traditional car companies, and I saw them at CES talking about software-defined vehicles when I don't think they had defined what a software-defined vehicle is. And you're absolutely right. It's a massive term. It's so broad. It's like just using the word technology. It just covers so many different things. And I think that the traditional OEMs, shall we say, the legacy manufacturers, they're really struggling with that. They have legacy systems, and the benefit that the startups have had is starting from a clean sheet of paper. Now, a lot of the traditional car companies, legacy car companies, whatever we want to call them, they don't have that benefit. They can do it, but it's almost like, let's just carry on with that business over there, making cars the way we've done it, and we'll start over here. Now, some have tried that, some are struggling with that, but I think it's something that the traditional car companies really need to get their head around, and they need to get their head around it fast because the benefits are clear. The need to do that, particularly around legislation as well, which is a lot of it is software based, and we can touch on that later on. But they're really struggling. That's what I'm saying. I think there's an opportunity for the startups, the newer brands, to take a lead on this. And really, I do worry for a lot of the legacy brands, not only in terms of managing what a software-defined vehicle is and integrating this new technology into their existing processes, but from a brand point of view. People like technology in their cars increasingly. It's got to be usable, which is absolutely key. But people like a vehicle that has technology in it, and that's where I think the new brands have an advantage. And the old brands, some of them, they're just not going to survive, I think.
I fully agree. And we also see that with our users who, some of them even test drive a software-defined vehicle for the first time. And when you tell them about all the potential the car has, the updates they get for free, right? They say, I don't get it in the first place, right? They are confused because it's simply new, especially in the European market. In China, that's already a commodity, right? No one would buy a car which is not fully upgradable.
Yeah.
In Europe, people start to get a sense of it and of the advantage of it. But yeah, as you said, usability is super important. And I think their software-defined vehicle can also contribute a lot, because when we look at regulations, but also when we look at opportunities, right? You have the opportunity to bring something new into older cars, to let people benefit from later software developments, but also to get to know your users, right, and act accordingly with your system.
I think you've touched on something very, very important, like getting to know the users. And I do have a slight concern that there are these phrases that we use, and some of us, as I said, within the industry don't really understand what a software-defined vehicle is. But from a consumer point of view, from a user point of view, from the people in the NIO house downstairs, if somebody's trying to talk to them about a car, they're very easily confused and very easily scared off. And it's almost, and I know we're doing a podcast on software-defined vehicles, but should we ban the phrase software-defined vehicles? Because a lot of the people in the car industry doesn't know what a software-defined vehicle is. The consumer, your users, they're even less likely to know what a software-defined vehicle is. They want to know what the benefits are. It's a little bit like AI. AI is banded around all over the place, and it's going to take over the world. It's going to destroy mankind. It's just a tool. It's just a tool. It's like a knife or a fork. It's just something to make life better for us, but it has a reputation. And I worry that the phrase software-defined vehicle, people are going to go, it's just too much technology. So please keep it simple, keep it clear, and make sure that the benefits of software-defined vehicles, which go from one side, it's just so broad, it's got to be explained clearly. And I think you guys have a responsibility, not only as NIO, but as an industry, to make sure the benefits are clear.
Absolutely. We talked about the benefits now. From your perspective, what are perhaps also the downside or the risks of software-defined vehicles?
Well, I think, again, I speak on behalf of the consumer, your users, and I think they are concerned about having too much technology. And I think people are confused quite a lot by the amount of technology that is available in their cars. I mean, look at our smartphones. There are so many things on our smartphones that our smartphones can do. We only touch the surface of it. It's like the human brain. You know, there's only about a third of the computing power in your brain that we actually use. And it's the same with software-defined vehicles. So you've got to be careful that, you know, you make sure that things are sold to people well and the benefits are there. But you know, the benefits are clear. They can make life much easier for people, you know, particularly upgrades, you know, being able to get into your car knowing that something has happened to make it better and I haven't had to pay for it. It's convenient. It's great. You know I can give feedback and people are listening and changing things. There are big concerns. You know, we rely on this phrase, the cloud, which again, a lot of people don't really know what the cloud is. You know, it's not up there. You know, it's a big building somewhere or under the sea or wherever it might be. You know, it's something that people don't understand. And we are reliant on data links. You know, what if that data link isn't there? You know, I travel on roads in the UK on major thoroughfares. You know, I'm driving from London to Birmingham. There are big black holes where I can't talk on my mobile phone. You know, we're in the 2020s. This shouldn't be happening. And am I reliant on that data feed? What will happen with my car if it's a software-defined vehicles and it's working with the cloud all the time? Will functions stop working? There are security issues over it as well. You know, what if it's a software-defined vehicle? What if it's hacked in some way? So, you know, there are big concerns. And again, it comes down to the messaging. And let's not talk about software-defined vehicles to consumers. Let's just talk to them about what the benefits are. Simple benefits. Keep it clear. USPs as well, things that you do as NIO that other people do, and there are plenty of brilliant things that you do differently, but it's about messaging to the consumer to make sure they're not frightened of it. It's not going to put them off, because the last thing we ever want to do is to talk about technology where people just go, that's too much, I'm just going to stick with what I've got. We want them to embrace these new vehicles. We want them to see what the benefits are, but it's the industry's responsibility to sell it properly in a way that people think, wow, this is fantastic. I've got to have that.
And you picked up two very important points, right? What can go to the cloud, what should go to the cloud, and what should stay in the car. I think that's very important when you define the architecture of your car, right? To me or to us, it's clear that everything that's safety relevant, like emergency braking system, the driving related stuff, right? That always needs to stay in the car. Because also the point is, as you said, right, black holes, no internet connection, no connection to the cloud. Cross fingers that changes in a few years, but in Germany we still have the same. So these functions need to stay in the car, that the car is drivable, that the car has the basic functions like offline navigation, etc. still available. For some other parts, it's pretty much for me like with your smartphone, as you said, right? Spotify, all the infotainment, all the, let's say, nice to have functions in the car, right? They can partially move to the cloud, and they partially are already depending on the cloud, right? Even if you have Spotify in your car, it's not in the car actually. So the music is still streamed from the Spotify servers and not locally stored in the cloud. The second big point is cybersecurity and also data security, right? That's across the whole industry, right? But somehow for a car, people get more sensitive. I totally understand that because it's also a new area. I mean, that's for every OEM, that's the same task, right? You need to rely on cybersecurity. And we have now seen the Microsoft CrowdStrike incidents where servers got down, a lot of things happen. And you need to have the reliability and you need to have the team set up before you launch such a product, test it to the max, reliability, uptime, teams, etc. So it gets more and more. So an OEM partially moves towards being like a bit like a Microsoft, right?
Yeah, I think we're finding that. You know, we talk as journalists to car companies. They please don't say we're a car company. We're a technology company, or we're a mobility solution. We're not a car company. Well, what do you make? We make cars. You're a car company, yeah. But a lot of it is around the messaging, isn't it? And that's so important. And we see so many things, particularly around electric cars, bad press, myths, lies that are perpetuated about electric cars. And I have a concern that it only takes one incident, doesn't it? There was an incident with a vehicle in the US that hackers were able to stop the vehicle. There are concerns that bodies might be able to infiltrate systems and stop cars in the middle of the road or block bridges or whatever they might do. So there are concerns over security, and it only takes one of those things to happen, and then it's out there. The myths that I hear about electric vehicles, for example, are just wrong, but people perpetuate those myths on social media, and it gets bad press. And I'm concerned not only with software-defined vehicles, as I mentioned AI as well, that there is bad press about things going wrong. I was speaking to a family member of mine in the US recently, and he's bought himself his first electric car. It's a Tesla. And he was saying how there are things that frustrate him, and it's all of the stuff around software. Bugs in the system, or things that just happen with the touch screen that he's not used to. And I said to him, you've got to think of this car is now a computer on wheels rather than wheels with a computer on it. It's built in a different way. Now, there are a lot of brilliant things about his car, and the car bits are probably absolutely fine. It's exactly the same with using your laptop or your iPad or your iPhone. Occasionally frustrations when an app crashes or something like that. It's very different when that happens in a car. People aren't used to it, but we've got to change our mindset and think this is a software car, a software-defined vehicle. It's not a car in the traditional sense. But again, it's the messaging, isn't it?
It's the messaging, yes. It's a reliable responsibility not only of the OEMs, but I think also of governments, right? If they want to push EVs, if they want to push software-defined vehicles for the sake of industry, but also for the good of the users and, for example, also road safety, right? When you can update the safety systems. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to describe. Lastly, let's come to your relative in US, right? With a software-defined vehicle. You can upgrade, you should upgrade, and you should listen to user feedback, right? You can't get everything right. And I'm quite curious if you reflect on your older cars, how much stuff in the older cars was also annoying, but you just accepted it because there was no other chance.
Yeah, it's what happened. It's how we brought up with cars. There's a rattle or something goes wrong, you fix it. And it's just a different world that we've got to get used to, and people have got to start talking about it and accepting it. But it's very important that you guys listen and you constantly communicate to them and sort of steer clear of calling them software-defined vehicles because it might scare them. The other thing I think is, we are very close to these things in the industry, and it is absolutely key to listen. And one of my favorite features on a NIO, for example, is the fact that you can just talk to the car and give feedback about things that you like and you don't like. And I know you and your team listen to that and react to it. And I think that's so important. But it's very important to tell people that they can do that.
Yeah, the biggest advantage of a software-defined vehicle, as we already discussed a bit, is that you can change the experience after you deliver the car to the user or even during a second life, right? And this is the software updates. And I think there are different philosophies how you do a software update. For us, it's really about we collect user feedback, then we merge it with our own ideas, right? We not only rely on user feedback, and then we align with the programmers and say, hey, is that feasible on that hardware we have in the car, on that technology platform? Can we also bring it to our older generation, or is the computing power not enough, etc.? And then basically the program, the software that takes 3 months for release. Then we have to test the software, right? Like smoke test, does the photo work? Do we have any critical bugs in the software we need to fix? And then some of our users get a beta release. So we already get feedback before the actual release. So we might still have time to fix some bugs if we see them, or we even take out certain functions if we see, that's not ready yet. And then you can deliver it. And this also needs a whole different infrastructure, a whole different methodology of project management, program management, etc. To do this. And basically we do that in a 6-month cycle, but we have overlaps. So it's always actually 3 months between each software update. That's super fun, and you can change a lot, you can upgrade a lot. the user feedback we hear is good in Europe.
I think from a consumer point of view, they love software updates. They love over-the-air updates. I think the benefits are clear, that there may be faults that are corrected with the car, that you don't have to take it to the dealership, and new functionality, I think, is great. Obviously, there are still concerns. There are times, people will probably have had experiences of software updates and everything on their phones, and it gives them new functionality, but it takes a while. You're downloading something. And I know from my experience, I've got into a car in the past which says your software needs updating, and it's you won't be able to use the car for an hour or something like that. Again, it's these sort of things that need to be overcome. But I think people also need a lot of reassurance that you're not going to be in a situation where the software is more up to date than the car itself, than the hardware. The software is ahead of the hardware. Now, I know there are, as we have discussed in the past, software over the air and firmware over the air updates as well, which affect the hardware. But what it's never going to do is actually change the physical hardware. So, do you think we're going to be in a situation where the software is ahead of the hardware? Our phones we change every couple of years. People don't want to be in a situation where they're going to have to do that with their cars, are they?
No, absolutely right. And actually, we have a third kind of hardware update that is possible: the ones who run on the back end, where the user doesn't need to do anything. Right. So. SOTA or software over the air, that's basically like an app update on your phone, right? Yep. That's easy to push. You have no reliability with ECUs, also computing units in the car. FOTA, that's the bigger one. But I mean, to be honest, you're always an evening on the couch watching a movie. And if it takes 1 hour, get off your phone, say, yes, please update. And the car in the garage is updated.
And you could, the next morning, find you've got a longer battery range, for example, with that sort of thing.
Something like that.
What's not to like?
But yeah, hardware gets older, right? This is why you should invest a bit more into the hardware once you design the car, right? To make it kind of future-proof, if you like. Not for 30, 50 years, but at least for the next 5 to 10 years, perhaps.
Yeah, you're touching on something very important there, because I had an experience with an Apple product. I love my Apple products. I've got an iPhone, I've got an Apple Watch on my wrist. My world is Apple. But my wife had an Apple laptop that had a problem with it. I took it back to Apple, and they said to me, "That's 7 years old. Yeah, I'm sorry, that's vintage. We don't support that anymore. So you'll have to take it to a specialist." Are we in danger of that happening with a car company? A 7-year-old NIO is, you take it back to the dealer and they say, no, sorry, we're not supporting that. It's got the old hardware, so we can't update the car anymore. That's a big concern, because not everybody wants to change their car every few years.
Definitely not. I mean, there are, even in Europe and in the rest of the world, there are regulations on that, right? Yeah, you are legally obliged to support a car for a certain amount of time, to also provide spare parts. And in this case, potentially also software spare parts, if you like, right? Some code fixing, etc. So there is definitely not the risk.
But let me ask you another question, which consumers will always be thinking.
Yeah.
The prices of cars are going up. Hopefully running costs, particularly of EVs, will start to come down as well. But I'm thinking software's fine. You just write a piece of code, don't you, compared to hardware? Surely software, having more reliance on software, that's going to make cars cheaper, isn't it?
No, actually not. It changes the way you can develop a car, right? So in the past, where you had to develop everything before, right, in a sequence, hardware and then the software, and then the car went to market, now you can partly parallelize the software development or the whole vehicle development in the end, and you can also do part of the software development after the start of production of the vehicle, right? So it's rather a shift in time of the whole development process than like saving money or something, right? Even we talked about perhaps having a bigger investment in the beginning to make the car a bit more future-proof, because you put bigger hardware in, hardware which is not necessary.
But I like the idea that, as you're saying, you can, to a degree, update the operation of the hardware through an over-the-air update, which I think is a huge benefit. And as I say, nobody doesn't like with their smartphone saying, "Hey, great, there's the latest operating system." It gives the manufacturer an opportunity to market that. And as you've said, when there's a software update from NIO, there's a big push on social media. It's a big occasion. There's a software update coming, the same way that Apple does it with the new OS. So it's a great opportunity for people to get more excited about their cars.
Absolutely. And communication is key, right? What we also do for every software update, besides the beta test, we do like a public event, more or less, mostly online, right? We are living in the 21st century. And then we also give people the chance to ask questions. But as I said, communication is key. So you need to communicate the content of the software update. What can the user expect, right? What should he prepare for, perhaps? But also to give the user time to ask questions if he likes or if he already has comments on certain functions, right? I think communication is key.
What do you think the role of legislation will be, particularly with the software-defined vehicle? Because, we know, and I know from talking to car designers, for example, when they say, we have to meet this crash legislation, that means we can only design a car that looks like this at the front. There are certain strict regulations that legislators suddenly throw at the car business. I'm guessing a software-defined vehicle means it's easier to react to that. But do you think there's a danger that the legislators might sort of almost reduce the ability to do weird and wacky things and try more? Are they going to restrict what you can do?
Depends on the region, right? You see a huge difference in the legislation for automotive, for example, in US and China versus Europe, right? Europe tends to be, in my personal opinion, perhaps over-regulate a bit certain areas. So there is definitely things that limit us in terms of what we can do, but also, for example, homologation, right? Certain things we can change today in the car via software update. We need to re-homologate the whole car. On the other hand, we can also let users with older cars benefit from new regulations, right? There are also positive regulations, like the one recently launched about that every car needs to display the battery health.
Yeah.
So we don't only develop that for the newly homologated cars, which we are obliged to do, but we said, hey, if we anyway develop it, let's also benefit our older users or the users who bought cars before from that, because that's a useful information for everyone. So I think legislation can go in both ways, and both ways support software-defined vehicles. What I see one point here where I think also the industry and also the KBA in Germany, etc., they need to rethink is how do they homologate a software-defined vehicle, right?
Yeah.
Do I still need to do all the physical tests, right? The test engineers, etc., or do I do it based on a software code, right? That you send them as an OEM a software code. Look, this is the code for the new function. This is the code from the previous function. Please compare and say.
Do you think there's clear benefits in different regions? You touched on different regions there, but also different tastes. There's no one car that suits every person across the entire world. There are different tastes in different regions, different average ages of people who buy cars. In Europe, tends to be a lot older than it is in China, for example.
Yeah.
I think in the UK at the moment, average age of a car buyer is 55. So, somebody who's that sort of age is going to want a different experience in their car to the average age of a buyer in China, which is going to be, at a guess, low 30s. Software-defined vehicles really help with that, don't they?
They can, yes. So starting from let's say the HVAC, right? If you sell a car in Norway, there are different temperatures, different weather conditions compared to a car in Oman or somewhere, right? So you can adapt the software of the HVAC system also later to cope with these conditions. When we talk about the age of the users, there's definitely a big difference, and so also a difference in user preference, but also in terms of accessibility, right? When you get older, naturally your eyesight, you lose some of your eyesight.
Thank you.
So you're welcome. So you should reflect that, right?
Yeah.
With the EU Accessibility Act now coming up next year for apps and websites first, but I guess it will also come to the automotive industry. And actually, I think it's part of the responsibility of the automotive industry to take that upfront, right? Not always to wait for certain regulations, but to also proactively think about the user benefit of people being able to read a screen without glasses. And that's the beauty, right? A lot of people are discussing, okay, I need buttons back in the car. But buttons, you cannot change the icon size, right?
Yeah.
On a touchscreen, you can do that. And with the technology coming up, there is more interaction than a touchscreen, right? Now we are in a phase where voice interaction gets quite reliable, right? And people get more and more used to it. Germans especially are still hesitant, as we always are. But if you look in US, if you look especially in Asia, voice interaction gets
it's
a common
getting
thing.
better, isn't it? I had an experience when I was out in Beijing for the auto show this year of seeing voice control work brilliantly in China. Certainly in Europe and the UK, it's not quite as good. I can't rely on it to do everything first time, but it's going to get there. But I love what you're saying about being able to personalize my car. You touched on older people with eyesight issues. The thought of being able to adjust the screen to my liking and to change the size of some icons. And I've been very vocal about bring back buttons, but when you think about it, the software-defined vehicle truly allows me to personalize the touchscreen experience so that I don't necessarily need to bring back the buttons, but I can actually use the touchscreen as I want to use it, not necessarily as a manufacturer wants to use it.
And let's go even one step further, right? In the future, you can already today use your voice. Perhaps you can use gestures, even by looking at something, right? That's already possible today with eye tracking. Or then if we talk more into the next generation, for example, of NIO, is that the system knows what you want before you know it. So taking now the second buzzword AI into account, right? The vehicle predicts what you actually need and reduces, therefore, the interaction you actually need to do with the car. That would be the most ideal scenario we are aiming for.
I think you're absolutely right. And what I would leave you with is a challenge. I've used gesture control in the past. Just doesn't work and not necessary. When I've got my hands on a steering wheel, next to a button that can adjust the volume, why do I need to take my hand off the steering wheel and wave my hand around? And that doesn't work anyway. So I guess my challenge to you is one, make sure you continue to listen to your customers and what they use and what they want, and don't give them stuff that you think they're going to want without asking them first. And I know NIO is very, very good at that. And the second challenge is please, you need to, as an industry, improve the way you communicate these benefits. I'm with you. I'm out for the ride. I'm all in. I love the idea of these software-defined vehicles and the technology and the accessibility that it's going to bring and the benefits. But you need to tell people, and that's something that the industry traditionally, and maybe the newer brands are better at it, hasn't been very good at doing, communicating with its customers. So please keep listening. Keep talking to your customers.
Thank you, Steve. That's definitely a challenge I like to accept. Sounds more like joy.
Thanks, Benjamin and Steve, for the many interesting insights on software-defined vehicles and the thoughts on the future of driving. On House of NIO, a NIO podcast.